I live in Fairfax Station, Virginia, with ARP Virginia. ARP is here to make your voice heard and provide information and resources on the issues that matter and to connect you with fun learning opportunities. We provide valuable educational, informational, and fun resources, things like webinars, teletown halls, discounts, and more. When it's safe to host in-person events, and I for one is hoping it's going to be very soon, you'll be invited to attend. In the meantime, ARP will continue to offer programs virtually. So before we get started on today's program, as usual, have a few housekeeping items to review with you. We will have time for Q&A at the end of Jim's presentation, so please submit your comments and questions in the chat box, and we'll do that at the end. Please keep yourself on mute, and if you're trying to multitask or moving around, please turn your camera off. I'd like to thank my co-host helpers today, who are also ARP volunteers, Trudy, Ann, and Opal. But I will also want to thank Amber Sultani, who really helped me a lot in getting this set up. She's the Associate State Director for ARP Virginia and Northern Virginia. But my volunteers will be monitoring the chat box, and they will also help turn your camera off and mute your microphone should it be needed. Hopefully that's not needed. Well, anyway, on to our program. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome our guest speaker, Jim Lewis. Jim Lewis is a noted Civil War and World War II historian, lecturer, and tour guide. He has authored numerous historical landmarkers and been the keynote speaker for their dedications. In recognition of his many local historical contributions, he was once designated Lord Fairfax by the Hunter Mill District here in Fairfax County, Virginia. Today, Jim is giving us a tour of the Hunter Mill Road corridor, which connects the Oakton and Reston areas in Virginia. It's 7.2 miles long and remains a historical treasure trove. Incredibly, the Hunter Mill corridor retains many of the characteristics that made it known by both sides of the American Civil War as the main road to and from Fairfax Courthouse and Dranesville, leading to the battles of Antietam and Gettysburg. If you are a history lover like me, you're in for a real treat. So please give a warm virtual welcome to Jim. And Jim, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Looking forward to this. I'm the fellow locally that most people get in touch with when they want to attend a tour in the Hunter Mill Road corridor, which the tour that I conduct, I've done it for over 10 years, done it over 60 times. And we start in Vienna. There's some great stuff in Vienna at the, anyway, in Vienna, where the poll took place on May 23, 1861, where everybody voted for the secession or not. And then we go into what is called Flint Hill. Today it's Oakton, and then on up Hunter Mill Road. And as was said earlier, Hunter Mill Road is 7.2 miles long, and the history associated with this road truly dates back thousands of years to Indian civilizations, quite frankly. But because of time constraints today, I'm just going to really kind of focus on Civil War action on this road and what occurred in the area here. So we'll go ahead and start. If you take a look at this drawing right here, you'll notice it's associated with Harper's Weekly. And Civil War vets or buffs or whatever will recognize Harper's Weekly as the paper of the day back in the day. And this story and this skirmish went viral nationally. And it actually occurred November 26, 1861. Had a couple months, excuse me, about a month delayed as far as putting it in the paper. But anyway, I'll mention it to you a little bit later on as we do the presentation. And remember, this is a skirmish near Hunter's Mill. By the way, Hunter's Mill was mentioned numerous times in the ORs, the records of the rebellion, and that's the official records of the rebellion, as an iconic landmark. So, and I'm talking 50, 60 times. And it was referenced in communique by both the Union and Confederate papers numerous times. So it wasn't just a Union landmark. Anyway, we'll go ahead and start. This is truly interesting. A number of people may be familiar with the 1862 McDowell map. And this was Irvin McDowell. He was the first Union commander of the in the East, and he's the guy that, quite frankly, lost First Manassas. And what he was doing before First Manassas, he had instructed his topographers to begin to put together a map of the area because they may need it. Well, after First Manassas and the travesty that befell the Union forces there was renewed energy in putting together this map. And it did come out in January of 1862, and an improved version with more information came out the following August. And this is a colorized version of the map, and this entails the Hunter Mill Road corridor right here. If you'll notice over here, this is Vienna, Virginia, and Vienna used to be called Air Hill before it received its name, quite frankly, in 1862, first year of the war, really. So there's Air Hill. Here is Courthouse Road, today's Courthouse Road, down to what is called Flint Hill. And I mentioned this previously, that is today's Oakton. Here is the first schoolhouse in the area. For those that are familiar with Oakton today, it's right across the street from Santini's, the deli restaurant. Anyway, this is Hunter Mill Road. And it connected up here with the Alexandria and Leesburg Turnpike, which is the predecessor to Route 7 today. So you'll notice that this road runs north-south almost the entire way, which lends itself to why I'm going to show you something shortly. But this is Hunter Mill. There were 3 mills on the road, which made it very attractive. There was a lot of water, hence you had 3 mills. This is Vibart's mill. We had Hunter's Mill and Old Mill, which is right off of Colvin Run, where the 1-lane bridge is today. Hawkshurst was just a little ways off of Hunter Mill Road on Difficult Run today. Just for those that are familiar with the area, this road right here is today's Lawyers Road. Now, today's Lawyers Road goes straight here. That was changed in 74, 75. Before then, it turned left, hit Hunter Mill, went up, and then turned left again. And you'll see where that occurred today. So without further ado, by the way, here's the W&OD trail today, bike trail. Back then it was called the Alexandria, Loudoun, and Hampshire Railroad. And we'll touch base on that as we go through the presentation. The thing that's really cool about this is that all the roads that you see mapped here are still here in existence. Now, they may not be readily apparent, but they're here. Some are in the woods, some are private driveways, and some are blatantly obvious roads. The road system is fairly accurate. The waterways are extremely accurate. For example, this road right here, that's Corral Road today. Anybody that knows Corral Road knows that that's 4 roads that connect to Route 7 today. This shows it as 1 road. So anyway, we'll go ahead and start. And this map over here just gives you a flavor for some of the historic sites that you would see along this 7.2 miles. And if you'll notice, and I'm not going to mention this guy very much, Arthur Godfrey, he had a farm between Hunter Mill and Route 7 in the early 1930s. And there are some great stories associated with him as he was very involved in the community. Okay, let's move on. Hunter Mill Road was known as the main road north between Fairfax Courthouse and Dranesville. And you wonder why that's important. Well, first of all, the courthouse was strategic. It was the courthouse. It was in the middle of the county. The road system was strategic because it contained major roads that were not abutted up against water. Thereby, armies marching those roads could potentially be attacked and not be able to get out away from the attack. So being in the middle of the county was important for flexibility purposes as much as anything. Finally, the earliest fighting in this area really did occur near Fairfax Station, Fairfax Courthouse. And with June 1 action, and there was a number of skirmishes between both sides. Eventually, the Union forces took control of this area because they were close to DC and they had more men and forces. And it became, Fairfax Courthouse became a major supply depot for the Union force. So it was significant. Therefore, a lot of the Union soldiers, in particular forces and generals, would frequent Fairfax Courthouse. So if you were to be at Fairfax Courthouse and you happen to want to go to the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Antietam, you would go up Hunter Mill Road typically. We have documented over 60 generals that frequented Hunter Mill Road, 15 of which were not generals at the time, but they later became generals. It's literally a who's who of generals on both sides of the war. Hooker, his staff, Joe Hooker, George Meade, John Reynolds, Ed Ord, Warren, Howard, Buford, Jeb Stuart, Hampton for the Confederates, as well as Bonham, and John Mosby. If you haven't heard of this fellow, he's a partisan, very famous. Our spec ops people follow his tactics and study them to this very day. He was up and down the road quite a bit and in the area a lot. Okay, so we're going to go from Oakton, Flint Hill, northwards towards Baron Cameron Avenue, up towards Reston. You just travel a little bit up the road, and on the right is a big oak. This oak is between 250, 300 years old, and we call it a witness tree because it's seen everything. And it saw the evolution of the area into what is called Oakton today. And this is the last remaining tree from an oak grove that was on this corner. By the way, it was called Oak's Corner, where the name Oakton eventually was derived from for the naming of the city, the town. So anyway, this is called Mosby's Oak for a couple of reasons. First of all, there was an encounter underneath this tree between a Quaker who owned and ran Little Sully. You all may be familiar with Sully out on Route 50. There was a Little Sully between Sully and today's Route 50. Anyway, he was a known disseminator of information for Union purposes, and John Mosby was not happy with that. There was an encounter between Haight, Alexander Haight, who was the Quaker, and Mosby underneath this tree. Haight was able to get away because he was riding a real fast black horse, and they just snapped him, with his whip, and he was able to escape. Later on in the war, this was a gathering place for Mosby's Rangers, who lived in the area, and they would get their missions statements or orders or directives right here, and then they would go out and perform their missions. By the way, here's Alexander Haight. There's John Mosby. John Mosby was all of 5'7". He was kind of small, but had eyes, blue eyes, very smart individual. Again, a lot of books have been written about him. So anyway, there's John. If you go a little bit further up the road, on your left, you come to this blue house. We had I say we, the 100 Mil Defense League, we put together a lot of research on the road. And one of the things we did was oral interview a number of people that had been around for quite some time. And we interviewed a Taylor Chest, whose family owned this house in the late 60s and 70s. And he told us that right off about here, his father and his older brother went out here and they took a root system out about 20 yards off of the porch right here. And as they were digging that root system out, they came across a box of this. And the entire box was full of Confederate money. Now we trace this back and we have real good information that basically states that this was money that the Confederates had at the beginning of the war to pay for horses. Horses were more important than men. May be hard to believe, but on March 9th, 1863, that was affirmed when Mosby came in on a famous raid at the courthouse and took out a general, General Bonham, and 58 horses. And Abraham Lincoln made note of that action, stating, I could make another general with a swipe of a pen, but gosh darn it, I can't get those horses back, and I paid $250 a piece for them. So that gives you a feel for the for the value of the horses. By the way, horses have pulled artillery all the way through World War II. So they were instrumental. This whole thing about Hitler and, you know, the Blitzkrieg, and you see all the stupid planes coming down out of the sky screaming and all the tanks and all of that. Hitler's entire armed forces were only 10% of them were mechanized. It was because of Goebbels and how he packaged the propaganda campaign that everybody had visions of Blitzkrieg all the time. It's not true. Horses were hauling most of their armor around throughout the entire World War II. So anyway, a little bit further up the road, here's the first mill. This would have been Vibart's mill over in this area. And this is the creek, Rocky Run, coming down through it. So this, again, this road had a lot of water. And as a result, it had 3 mills and the foraging was great. Another reason it was so popular was that it traveled, as I mentioned previously, north-south, basically as the crow flies. So there was a lot of twisting or anything like that. This was a great road to get from Fairfax Courthouse going northwards. Hence, that's why it was traveled so much. Okay, now this is the McDowell map in its typical form. It's not colorized per se, and I annotated it a little bit. By the way, this creek right here and where this mill was would have been right about here. So we're traveling north and there's a road that turns off right here. Any of the locals know what this road was called? That's Vale Road. This is Vale Road going to Vienna. However, this is the first iteration of it. There are 3 iterations today, of which this portion comes in a little bit lower, closer to Vienna, and it goes and turns into Malcolm Road. If you're familiar with Vienna, I'm sure you'll recognize that name. Anyway, as you travel Hunter Mill Road, you'll see there's another Old Wagon Road that connects with today's Lawyers Road. And you'll see 2 houses, Peck and Brooke. Now it's real hard to see this, but at the end of Brooke is an E. It's B-R-O-O-K-E. That second road, the Old Wagon Road, is this private drive right here. And this went through Glen Cannon neighborhood and intersected again with today's Lawyers Road at its very entrance of the Glen Cannon community and neighborhood. This is the Church of the Good Shepherd. So just to position you, particularly for those that are familiar with the road today. Now, this is the Peck House. Now, I absolutely will admit this has changed radically over time, but the infancy of the Peck House is here. I know the fellow that owns it, and the reason I mentioned the Peck House is that on March 7th, by the way, Mrs. Peck was very well known for dishing out great breakfasts, and the Confederate pickets who were in this area would go there for breakfast. Word got out, Union found out about it, and they dispatched the Pennsylvania Reserve Cavalry Unit, the 5th PA Cav, to come out on March the 7th, 1862, early in the morning, out of McLean. And it was Camp Griffin near Salona, today. And they attacked this house early morning, and Union Captain Wilson, who led the charge, was killed. A Confederate soldier was killed in action, and 4 were captured. Now, another squadron discovered even more Confederates in a nearby log house, and they exchanged fire. A Union sergeant was severely wounded in the leg. He later died, and 6 more Confederates were captured. They were all, the wounded and the captured were sent to Freedom Hill, which is near the old Courthouse Road, right off of, right near the toilet bowl building, which is commonly called that. And that's very close to where Old Courthouse Road intersects with Ox Road, Chain Bridge Road today. So just remember this clearing action though, on March the 7th, 1862. There was a reason for that clearing action. There's the Brooke House. Here's the original Brooke House right in the middle. Now this house is no longer here. And this house ties into a historic school that is still up, and it's a personal residence today. Dates back to 1897. But as you're driving up Hunter Mill Road, if you look to the left, there's a very small undulation of the ground, and that was the driveway up to the Brooke estate. So, okay, I mentioned Vienna and today's Lawyers Road and how it came into, it continued back in the day into Hunter Mill Road this way, and then came up and went left. This was all straightened up in 1975. This road, this turnoff right here that was straightened up is still there today. This road dates back to 1872. And this is not the original Lawyers Road. There was a Lawyers Road. It exists today, but this was not a portion of it. This was called Colonel Broadwater's Mill Road when he commissioned this road to be constructed and surveyed out to his mill, which was out here off of Difficult Run. So anyway, this spot is right here. And this spot, as you could tell, went right into Hunter Mill Road. Here's where it ends today. When this road was straightened up in 74, 75, they lifted Hunter Mill Road. They raised it in this particular area. So the road just hits right into the bank of Hunter Mill Road. Now, as you head down towards Vienna, we're going to stray off of Hunter Mill Road for just a second. And we're going to go towards Vienna. Remember I mentioned the skirmish, the very beginning slide in the Harper's Weekly? Well, that pertained to a cavalry action that took place on November 26, 1861, when the 3rd Pennsylvania Cav came out of Georgetown, and they all, came out of McLean also, and they came up Hunter Mill Road. And excuse me, they came up to Vienna and turned onto today's Lawyers Road. And as they turned onto Lawyers Road, heading west towards Hunter Mill Road, the Confederate 1st North Carolina Cavalry was sitting up on top of the hill. And if you know where that hill is today, it's where the American Legion is sitting. And there's a fort up there. There's a reason there's a fort up there. It's high ground. Well, they saw the Union cavalry force and they attacked them. There was a running fight down to this location. Anyone that's traveled Lawyers Road into Vienna will recognize this structure. Believe it or not, that's a church. Today it's a residence. That is or was the Second Beulah Methodist Church. I know the fellow that renovated this. I used to play racquetball with him. And he converted it from the church into his own personal dwelling. Well, right to the left of it, and this could be a panorama, slides, photos, if you will, is this private drive. It might be tough to see this, but if you squint, you might be able to see a fence, a wood fence at the very end, because the road, it's a driveway turns here into the house up here. If you look beyond that, you will see this. This, believe it or not, is Clark's Crossing Road. Clark's Crossing traversed from Lawyers Road all the way over to Beulah Road back in the day. And this is a portion right behind this fence. It's a photo I took a number of years ago. So because of that activity, and the reason why this was so important as a skirmish or whatever, it was early in the war. And this was Jeb Stuart, Confederate cavalry commander. It was his first cavalry's engagement against Union cavalry. And they did a job on the Union cavalry. The 3rd Pennsylvania had incurred 35% casualty rate. And what they did, they raced, they got to this point, they turned off on this road to escape the Union forces, and they went all the way over to Beulah Road and to what is called Four Corners today. It's where 2 Beulahs run into each other, one heading towards Vienna. Trap Road is there, and the other road is Old Courthouse, which led folks to the first courthouse, which again was up near the toilet bowl building in Tyson's Corner. By the way, does anybody know why that road was called Lawyers Road? It was because when Fairfax County was formed in 1742, there was no Loudoun County. Fairfax was huge. Therefore, the barristers of folks that wanted to come in and have their say in court had to travel down to Tyson's Corner. Lawyers Road was named after that activity, if you will. So it enabled the lawyers to come in from the western reaches of the county to today's Tyson's Corner. By the way, we, Hunter Mill Defense League has authored 11 historical markers that are on the road or just off the road. And this is one of the markers. It's a state marker. This is Jane Seaman. She was a previous mayor. She was fantastic. She drove 250 miles to make this dedication. And we had 250 people show up for this dedication on a Saturday morning. A lot of them were the local community folks that wanted to hear and see about their area. Okay, we come out to make a U-turn, come on out back to Hunter Mill Road, make a right, and you'll turn into Cedar Pond Drive community. And here's the main road in from Hunter Mill Road. Stop right here. You'll look across here, and over in this area, we found a large number of what we call rings of fire. And those were encampments that had burnt stones around them. And this absolutely was a horse rehab location And you can see the creek because you got to have water. And that's Angelica Branch. That came right down through here and crossed right here. This was a rehab camp for Mosby and his Rangers. One of the biggest things Mosby and his Rangers did during the war was abscond with Union cavalry horses. As I mentioned, how important were they? Well, a number of them needed to be rehabbed, and they were rehabbed in this area. This area right here is right down over here. So this would have been very close to where those rings of fire were located. We found a tremendous amount of blacksmith artifacts. Also, in addition to that, we found all of this. And you could tell, I mean, anybody who's been in the military, you got a lot of dead time. And besides rehabbing horses, what do? Well, some of these guys were musical. As you can see, there's a harmonica, Jew's harp. They just play their music, whatever. That's a gold watch. We have all these things in our possession. Straight razor, thimble for fixing things. And what was kind of cool is, again, Mosby was in the area. And when Mosby would ride through the area and saw the children in the yards, he'd set them on a saddle and lead them around. The kids would later say, "I rode with Mosby." Okay. Here we are down in the area that floods all the time. And difficult run flows right across. And this is the horse farm area. Remember I mentioned previously there was a clearing action on March 7th? It was because what happened was that the Pennsylvania Reserve was ordered out to this area March 9th. And they were to do a shakeout, get rid of all superfluous things. They spent several days here, and their orders were to attack the Confederates out in Centerville, where they had been in winter quarters. Problem is, the Confederates got wind of McClellan getting on ships and going down by water to the peninsula for the Peninsula Campaign. So the Pennsylvania Reserves found out that the Confederates had already left Centerville. So they marched back to Alexandria and got on the ships and went down to the Peninsula Campaign. Anyway, there were 15,000 of them, and they encamped on this road for about a week, getting ready for that attack. And they had an all-star cast of generals, and they were division commanders at that time. John Reynolds, first general killed at Gettysburg. George Meade, he was the Army of Potomac commander, had 3 days of notice before the Battle of Gettysburg. And I thought you would appreciate this. This is one of the best quotes you'll ever see. This guy, he was unhappy. He was woken up at about 3 a.m. on June 28th and told he was now commander of the Army. Nobody wanted it because of all the political stuff that was going on with DC and the field and the military. He got stuck with it. His great quote. Now, this is 3 days before Gettysburg, because Hooker quit. "I have been tried and condemned without a hearing, and I suppose I shall have to go to the execution." That was his quote before Gettysburg. And anyway, what a piece of work. And this is Ord, O-R-D. Every one of these guys, Edward Ord, 1st Brigade, 2nd Brigade, 3rd Brigade. Every one of these fellows has a fort named after them. Reynolds in Colorado, Meade, of course, most people know, Maryland, Ord out in California. Meade's had 4 companies of these guys, and they were marching on this field for about 4 or 5 days. These are called bucktails. I bet you could guess why. They came out of Western Pennsylvania, and you could see what they got up top. And there were some deers walking around, maybe walking, without all of their tail. So that's how they identified themselves. And they're a storied group. Now, while the Pennsylvania Reserve was out here, the newspaper sent this fellow out to cover it. And he was basically the Dan Rather of the day, particularly those that remember Vietnam. And his name is George Alfred Townsend. And he recorded everything that took place out here. There's even a book about it. And that's one of our sources that we use for what this area was like back during the Civil War. Now he's sitting next to this fellow right here. I bet you all remember and might recognize him. That's Mark Twain and David Gray, who was a poet editor. Okay, a little bit further up, we actually crossed Difficult Run. And here's where Hunter's Mill was located. Now, today you can see this because the foliage is pulled back. And that's when I like to do my tours. Early spring, late fall. So the foliage pulls back and you can see everything. This is a tail race. And that's with a mill. You've got a race that takes the water to the mill, and then a tail race lets the water come out. This is at the very end, and that rock would be right down here in this picture. This was the picture, photo was taken. I took this from up top, not far from where the mill was located. This is the tail race. There's Hunter Mill Road, and here's Difficult Run. This is what I am told is Hunter Mill. I'm not sure I buy it, but it was a book and it was captioned Hunter Mill. People say it is, but we'll see. Now, one of the things we found when we were doing our research, we've got a fellow in our group that was the man. He was the artifact metal detective icon of Northern Virginia for decades. So we were very fortunate to have him in the group, and he shared everything he found with us, of which were these things. I would assume most of you know that in the Civil War, basically all bullets were lead. You can imagine today what we do with lead, right? If it's in a schoolhouse, the kids have to go home until the guys come in with all the white outfits and they take the lead out. Well, you know, I told you about soldiers getting bored a little bit. Well, what they did here, they made a fishing lure out of one, put it down in here, and there were fish here as well as Difficult Run. This is a poker chip. They played a lot of poker. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, let's get to the intersection. This is where today's W&OD Trail crosses Hunter Mill Road. And this is where most of the action took place during the war. This is a storied intersection, so much so that up here was a picket post that the Cavalry Brigade, Union Cavalry Brigade in Vienna had set up a picket post or a sentinel. Mosby and his boys attacked this 3 times, late 63, early 64. Mosby's Rangers were always successful, taking horses and whatever. But that's where a picket post was located. By the way, this is late 1930s, and you could still see the trees are not around. This place took a heavy toll during the Civil War because of all the traffic. This is Hunter Mill Road. There's the AL&H Railroad back in the day, Alexander at Loudon, New Hampshire. For those that were wondering, how did Hampshire get into the mix? Remember, early in the war, as a matter of fact, up until 10 days before Gettysburg, there was no West Virginia. And anything west of, if you will, what we would call West Virginia today was called Western Virginia. So the railroad was put together, and the objective was to access the Shenandoah Valley, quite frankly, of which they wanted to get to Hampshire County, Western Virginia, where the coal was. Alexander was competing against Baltimore and Georgetown, fierce rivalries. So they were always trying to access other areas in their way to defeat the other, if you will. I thought you would enjoy this, though. This is a mail line. This is 1860, and it was formed by the railroad that came out of Alexandria, and it took the mail. It left Alexandria at 8 a.m. on the train, and it would arrive in Winchester at 5 p.m. But it wasn't arriving by train. Once it got to Leesburg, it turned the mail over to a stagecoach. And that was the Means and Fawcett first class mail coach. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, this is same era as this, if you will, and that's what a station looked like. Not a big deal on a railroad. And this is looking west, and there's Hunter Mill Road. Remember this tree and that structure that's right behind it. This is a structure that's right behind it. This is the stations manager house. Now, has this been renovated? Sure. It's been renovated, rebuilt, and all of that. But the foundation, we had somebody come in and do analysis of it. The foundation of this dates back to the 1700s. Just for your information, here is a portion of the original Lawyers Road right here. Nobody knows about it. Look at it, it's beautiful. And it's not far from Meadowlark Road, where the botanical gardens are off of Beulah and all of that. That's the route, Lawyers Road. And that's another story altogether that is truly fascinating to explain why and how this evolved over time. This house right here was a hospital during the Civil War. And it hosted, if you will, took care of a lot of the Union soldiers that got hit and wounded at the Battle of Dranesville in October of 1861. Now, if you travel up the road just a little bit further on the right, and you can see all this stuff today. That's what's great with no foliage. This section right here, this was George Meade's headquarters right here. This structure dates back to 1750 and was one of the outposts for Lord Fairfax VI, of which this county was named after. It was one of his outposts for hunting. So it's been added on to, this is a historical property. By the way, in the 70s, this was also a safe house for the CIA. Drive a little bit further up, make a left into Sunnybrook location, the community, and you'll drive up Clover Brook Road. About halfway into it, you'll stop, you'll see this clump of trees up top. We found numerous burnt Confederate everything up here. This was a field hospital. After First Manassas, the Confederates came in, took over for 3 months. A lot of those boys that were here were not used to this climate and this environment. A number of them South Carolinians and everything. They got sick. They died. They also had to have a few limbs removed, which if you know anything about the Civil War, that's probably the most commonly known thing about, you know, what these soldiers had to endure. So we found all sorts of Confederate, artifacts related to uniforms and everything. All were burnt. This is an example of what we found here. Now, also, why would we know that there were some limbs taken off here? Because of this. If you don't have enough chlorophyll, and sometimes they didn't, what you would do is that you would take a bullet and bite it. And this is how Bite the Bullet began, because these guys were just doing anything to endure what was happening to their body. Very close to this hospital is this little pond, spring, if you will. It's still there today, cranking out water. Now, the Confederates that died were buried across the street in this mound. They have since been reinterred over to the Confederate cemetery in Fairfax, and they're in this mound now, and that's a Confederate memorial over in the city of Fairfax. This mound still has the field stones and little pink flags that the county comes in and they flag it periodically as to where the bodies used to lie. And there are about 15 of them. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Now you're coming to my yard. And this is where we normally end the the tour because we run out of 4 hours, literally. And I could go on for another 4 hours, but no, we just got to get back to the Freeman store in Vienna, where we started, and that's where we gather. Anyway, this is my yard right here in the middle. When I retired, people always ask me, how'd you get into this? And I was drinking a beer with my buddy who lived on this lot. He had a porch in the back, and we were just looking out the back of our yards, and we saw these trenches or holes. And we thought, what the heck are those things? And so we got heavily involved, need I say, in researching. And that's when we met Hunter Mill Defense League. And this is just a smidge of what's back here on this property. And this is a ridge up here where our houses are. And it goes down to a stream down below. And this is Tamarack over here. All earthworks face east. So we got Fairfax County Archaeology Department out for 2 winters. They researched this, they gridded it, and they eventually gave us an FX number, which is a historical number associated with this particular site, and it's been logged in Richmond, Virginia. So if anybody were ever come in and try and build on it, I have over an acre of property, which is one of the biggest lots in Reston. The developer would have to go through a lot of hoops to do anything. And because of the way the land lies, it'd be real tough for them to do so anyway. Anyway, the whole reason for putting this encampment, which is pristine to this very day. We've got tent sites where the soldiers were sleeping. We have the artillery location where we found what they were doing, and they were setting up shop to knock out the train that was coming out of Alexandria. The Confederates got 2 out of the 3 locomotives early on, and it was Robert E. Lee, who was the Virginia Command of Operations. He was the one that gave out the orders to first steal everything, and secondly, destroy. And the railroad was effectively destroyed June 17th, 1861, only 3 weeks after the secession vote in Vienna. They tore down the water tower and the tracks, and it was never rebuilt during the rest of the war. So what would happen was the supplies and all that would come out of Alexandria and the horses to Vienna, and it was a railhead. And they distribute the supplies up and down the line. That was the early warning system for Washington, D.C. So that's what occurred the rest of the war. But this is the one locomotive that survived. And this is the one that went back and forth between Alexandria and Vienna the entire war. Now, if you all could see this right here, we know what was here. Here it is.
Wow.
We have all of this stuff. Plus we have bayonet scabbards. We have it all. And it's in my garage. So I better make sure you don't remember where I live. But anyway, that's why we kind of finish up here. Once I tell a story as to what's here, and you actually see everything, all sorts of rifle pits, the trenches are here. It's just incredible story. But the Confederates did set up shop here to take out this train, but they didn't have to because the rail line was ripped up after June 17th, like I said. So they basically left the area, but they were set up to take these trains out. If I show you where that cannon was set up, the 12-pounder, which is what this is, you could not miss the locomotive from that location. And if you're on today's W&OD trail and you look up to where that artillery, that 12-pounder was set up, you could not see that gun. It was like perfectly set up. So anyway, that's the back of my yard, typically where we kind of end. But we're going to go a little bit further. I bring this up because this is Cartersville Church, and it was a schoolhouse also. And this is African American. And The reason it's here, this was the first marker that Hunter Mill Defense League ever put together. Quite frankly, a lot of it is out of local lore because nothing was really written down, but there was such an interest in by the local community in the church. And by the way, this is the third church. One before was burned and all of that. And so this was rebuilt in 1979. But this property right here is right on the edge of the S loop that goes through Hunter Mill Road and the back entrance into Reston, Sunrise Valley Drive. It's a very storied story, if you will, because this land and this church was derived from 1863 from the Black Hamlets of Cartersville and Woodentown. We know where both hamlets were located, and we know the full story as to what occurred here. And Toll Brothers came in behind it, and they bought all the land, and they tried mightily to buy this land and rip this thing up and put in a McMansion. Behind it, it's full of McMansions. Ironically, one of the McMansions has this right off the back porch. This is Rose Carter. She was a free Black lady, and she was the one that had the land and donated it to the church and the congregation for purposes of building a church in the future. But the African American families, they would congregate in the middle of the war, 1863, in the area, in the houses of which they lived in. Later on, they finally were able to get land from Rose Carter and build a church. So the whole community jumped in to save this, which is a great story. Now, I told you I wasn't going to talk, I was going to focus on the Civil War, but I'll just mention this. This guy is heavily involved, not in the Civil War, but the 1930s. He had that farm further up Hunter Mill Road, and there's some great stories associated with him raising money on behalf of some local efforts. One of which, this was a schoolhouse, and it was closed in 1939 because of lack of attendance, which is what happened to a lot of schools in the area at different times. And he had the top-rated radio show and two top-rated TV shows later on in his career, but he worked out of Alexandria, which is where his radio show was. And he raised a lot of money to help the kids who were going to school here, and they didn't have the money to go to the next school when this was closed, and that was Louise Archer down in Vienna. They didn't have the 15 cents to get on the train to go to school and come back. So he raised a bunch of money on his radio station for a blue bus. And that bus, after 1939, took all the kids that were going to the school down to Vienna every day. So it's a great feel-good story, and it's just a piece of the history here, and that is associated to a degree with the Civil War. Okay, last but not least, so this will do it. If you go further up Hunter Mill Road, you'll cross Colvin Run, and that's where the infamous single-lane bridge is. Anyone that's lived around here knows how storied that is. It's eventually and fairly soon going to finally be replaced by a two-lane bridge. But anyway, to the right of it, and that was Colvin Run, to the right of it was another mill. It was called Old Mill, if you remember, on the McDowell map. So that is the third mill that was on Hunter Mill Road, i.e. 3 water sources had to be on the road to give you those 3 mills. Anyway, if you drive up from Colvin Run and you keep going and you look to the left, you'll see a cemetery. That's Brown's Chapel Cemetery. This is kind of almost a who's who of this area are buried here, along with across the street, there's a cemetery called Brown Cemetery. And I won't get into that at this point in time. But there are 3 Civil War vets buried here in this particular cemetery. And obviously this is a Mosby Ranger, Lewis Middleton Herald. And obviously this is an old picture, as you could tell with that flag, but I thought you would appreciate it. Okay, the last story real quick. As I mentioned, I have conducted over 60 tours. The buses, they fill up within hours when I announce the tour, because it's a relatively small bus, about 21 people, because we just can't maneuver with a huge coach, if you will, on Hunter Mill Road and everything. Anyway, one of my tours, we got to this point, and Baron Cameron is right up here. We're almost at the very end. And this fellow was on a tour, and he approached me and he told me a story about his grandfather. And I said, you know, that's pretty cool. We've been looking for a marker for this section of the road, and I think I will incorporate that in a marker. And I did. And basically, this tells a story of the 12th Union Corps, who on June 17th was part of the advance party to go to Gettysburg. Now, just 30 hours earlier, the Union Army had marched 25 miles from Dumfries to Fairfax Courthouse area. It was hottest week of the year, and many of them were struck with sunstroke. A number of them died. This is the commander of the 12th Corps. He had about 8,000 men left in his corps, which was a relatively small corps, by the way. Anyway, on the 15th, they endured that march. First thing, 3 a.m. on the 17th, they got up, and as part of the advance party, and by that I mean it was their orders to go to Leesburg and secure any crossing site or any ford that might be available for the entire Army of the Potomac to cross, chasing Bobby Lee, because they were trying to catch up to him as he was heading into Pennsylvania. Anyway, just 30 hours after 30 hours after that horrendous 25-mile march, the 12th Corps got up early to beat the heat, and they marched to Hunter Mill. They had breakfast at Hunter Mill. They looked around. They got orders to continue. They were able to march 2 more miles up Hunter Mill Road. They got to this point. That was it. They were done. They could not march any further. So they were ordered to encamp. Now, this was a very fortunate location because you were between 2 water sources, Colvin Run being one and Piney Run being the other, which goes under today's Route 7. So in this area, this happened to be on June 17th, 1863. Feel free to look it up. The hottest day of the year. The temperature was about 100 degrees in the shade. These guys are wearing those real cool outfits called wool and carrying guns like this. That's not a lightweight gun, trust me. He jumped me when I got to this area, and he said, I have to tell you something. And I said, okay, go ahead, sir. He told me about this fellow. This is his grandfather. And this fellow's name is William Fairbanks. And this is Sergeant Reuben J. Fairbanks. And he told me this story about the 12th Corps coming up here and the fields catching on fire. I did research, and the 1st Brigade Commander, or 1st Division Commander, Brigadier General Alfred Starkey Williams, had in his book stated, here, the dry old grass of the field and woods got on fire and filled the air with smoke and additional heat. This thing, what happened here on the 17th, basically choked these guys to death and their horses. So I said, yeah, that's good enough. We're going to do a marker. And so that's what this is, and that's why it's called Fields of Fire. So that's the last story I have for you. And this is just purely Civil War oriented. And for anybody that is in the area or would like to take the tour at any point in time, please give me an email. Here's my email address. Send me an email and just tell me you would like to be put on my to contact list. No, there's no commitment. I just alert people, okay, I've got a tour coming up, and it's just a 100 mil. I do a number of other local tours in the area too, and I do a lot of presentations like this. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, Jim, thank you very much. That was,
Thanks, Jim.
I learned quite a bit. I learned that there was a lot of history just very close to me, Fairfax Station. So thank you again. Folks, unfortunately, we won't have time for questions, but of course, Jim has given you his contact information. So he can also send you, you can send him questions. But we would love to get your feedback on today's program and ideas for future programs. In the chat box, you'll see a link to a survey. Please click on to the link and take a few moments to share your feedback with us. We'll also send this link in a follow-up email later today. Anyway, for future programming, we hope to see you in 2 weeks for our next program of today's Tuesday Explorers, excuse me. On Tuesday, March 23rd at 1:30, we're going to take a virtual tour of the Galapagos Islands, and you're most welcome to join us. Once again, our sincere thanks from ARP to Jim Lewis. That was really amazing, Jim, with all the information you provided. We had to wrap it up. Otherwise, we could have kept on going. But until then, take care of yourself, everyone, and those you love. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the weather wherever you are.
Thanks for attending.